Welcome back to another episode of Sal and Pals Go to the Movies. This is another Throwback Thursday review, and I'm here with my friend Touly. Say hi, Touly.
Hello, everyone.
And today we're going to be reviewing The Invisible Man from 1933. And just a fair warning, there's going to be spoilers up ahead, so you've been warned. A scientist finds a way to become invisible, but in doing so, he becomes murderly insane. So my first pro for this movie is the length, around an hour and 10. Pretty short for today's standards, but back then it was a normal length. Next is the amount of main characters involved. We have Jack Griffin, Flora, Dr. Cranley, Flora's dad, and Dr. Kemp. And with this is basically just the right amount of people that you want to have for these older movies. Not too many characters, not to say that there's no extra actors in there, but main characters is what I'm talking about. So with that, it's a perfect right amount. Next, I want to talk about Claude Rains as the Invisible Man. With his clear voice is the Invisible Man that you think about now. He's the iconic image that comes to mind now. Also, an actor taking a role where your face is only shown till the end of the film is really kind of hard to imagine nowadays, because not a lot of the actors want to do that unless it's an animated film that you voice a character. But in regards to a live action movie, you never ever get somebody to want to fill in a position like that, because it's about having that appearance on the film. You know, it's the face that sells it for the next movie. That's what gets you the job. So for that, I want to say kudos to him for taking on this movie. There was other people who didn't want to take it for that specific reason, because they said that we're not going to be on screen. He's only shown at the end of the movie dying, and that's really ballsy of him, if I say so myself. He took the role, and throughout the movie we do see him, but wrapped up in bandages. And also, this is the iconic image that the Invisible Man has now in the media, that if you ever see the famous Universal monsters, Dracula, Frankenstein, werewolf, and the Invisible Man, they're portrayed as this: the Invisible Man wrapped up in wraps and a suit or something, and glasses and gloves. This is the image that this actor had in this movie, Claude Rains. He is wrapped, and the reason his voice is so clear is that he was an actor on stage. So for this movie, it works really well. And just a side note, Mark Hamill is quoted saying that he bases Joker on Claude Rains' performance from The Invisible Man from this movie. So just imagine that if it wasn't for this movie, we wouldn't have the famous Joker from the animated series. Just putting that out there. And this film has the idea of science making potions that gives you powers, with the secondary effect that at the end there is a lesson to be learned. That is the kind of movies that were shown in back in the days, that science does give you powers, but you shouldn't meddle in it until you know its full potential, because it could cause you to go mad. The last thing is that I want to touch upon the special effects for its time. These special effects for during this period of the movies were amazing, because a lot of people, when they saw the Invisible Man taking off the wrap, it's said that some people actually fainted in the theater. So I mean, now that we see it's kind of like, you can even see like, oh well, any streamer nowadays that streams can do this with a green screen kind of thing. But back then it was like amazing, you know. I really liked some of the scenes when he's walking through the snow, you see the footprints and stuff like that, or even the simplistic things of him getting the log and throwing it in the fire, you know, just using wire, you know, stuff like that. You know, back in the days, that was kind of a hard thing to do with film, but it worked. And just looking back at old movies where they start tampering with these special effects, that even now there's some movies that take this and go further ahead, like for example Paranormal Activity. You know, they took this idea and they went further, you know. So with that, those are my pros. Now moving on to my cons. For the humor that she brought to the film, Una O'Connor, the innkeeper, she was over the top. Sure, she broke the ice, but still, this movie was not the type of movie that needed humor in it, even though some other scenes seem really humoristic, as when the Invisible Man's kicking people over, pushing them over, especially when they're bending over and he kicks them in the rear. But to me now, when I look at it, it's kind of over the top. This actress, she comes from a comedic background, so the director put her in there because he was fond of her, and she went over the top. I mean, I actually giggled when she's on screen. To me, it was best placement for her, because it made me laugh. when I really didn't want to laugh. I wanted to be immersed into the movie. My next point is the idea of Kemp loving Flora didn't stay too long. It should have basically played more into the story. For example, it should have basically been that Kemp kept hitting or suggesting that Flora should run away with him, and then Griffin later finds out that Kemp was seducing her. By doing that, he goes mad and leads him to kill Kemp, versus how he actually died in the movie. My next point is some of the cops and some scenes of Griffin attacking them didn't flow as smoothly, because we did see them setting up, obviously there is no invisible man in the film, so they had to push themselves over or, like throw themselves by themselves. It was cut and edits that were the biggest things that I would say did not really flow well. But for back in those days, you couldn't help it. But I would just say that if you would have filmed it and had these characters being stunt doubles so they can actually do these moves or acting more smoothly, then it would have led the movie to be more believable. And also the scenes when the cops were lining up and a cop says, "Oh, he hit me on the nose." For me, that kind of threw me off. It would have been more enjoyable if the Invisible Man was hitting them or getting the batons and hitting them, knocking them out, while the cops didn't know where the guy was. It's a little humoristic, but in a sense, it still brings the idea that sometimes when you don't know how to deal with a problem at hand, it catches you off guard. So my last point is he should have died by finding an antidote or trying to make Flora invisible, which leads the police to basically find him and kill him before he'd succeed in making Flora invisible, and not by him basically letting his guard down, because that's how he ended up dying. He just went into the barn and took a nap. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to my friend Touly and see how he saw this movie and what grade he gave the movie.
So this was the first time that I ever saw the original Invisible Man that came out in 1933. So for that, I'm going to try to review this film from two perspectives. One, considering that the movie was made in 1933 and that they were limited in still technology compared to today, and how they would have gone about creating these sort of special effects. And because of that, I feel like that component is going to fall under my positives a lot more, versus me just watching this film as a viewer and maybe seeing things that I thought maybe could have been left out or could have been handled better in terms of like either character development or how they were telling the story. So just wanted to throw that out there. As I mentioned there, for a film that came out in 1933, and for them to want to create a movie about an entity that wasn't on screen, but at the same time trying to create the illusion that there was something there by having a physical appearance before it just vanishes into thin air, I do have to applaud the film for that, because I could easily imagine this sort of inspiring works down the road to either take ideas from it to improve upon it. The amount of effort and determination they were trying to put forward to create such a movie. So I have to applaud them for that. And the film being just a little over an hour long, as Sal mentioned, even though it is way shorter than today's standard, I still liked it because I sort of, in a way, again, seeing it for the first time, I treated it like one of those 1 hour TV shows like The Outer Limits or The Twilight Zone, where it's just about a phenomenon or some sort of horrific incident and how the people who are involved in said incident react to the situation. Because I kind of looked at it in that way. The length of the film didn't bother me as much in terms of maybe the movie needing a little bit more content to explain certain aspects and whatnot, such as maybe developing the relationship between Kemp and Flora, because there was obviously a one-sided love affair there, but Flora wasn't feeling the same way as Kemp was. But because there was so little there that I sort of either just ignored it or didn't really consider it into the overall picture of it being a motive for Griffin to do what he did to Kemp at the end, where that was just pretty much the result of a trust being broken between the two individuals, where Kemp reached out to the police and sort of put Griffin into like harm's way. If there was like no mention of how Kemp felt towards Flora, I would have been okay with that too. I actually enjoyed watching Kemp the most throughout the film because I felt like he was put into a situation that was so unique, and I just wanted to see how he would handle the situation. For him to be between like a rock and a hard place, because if he betrays Griffin, then Griffin of course was gonna retaliate, but him not sure what to do as well in terms of like going to the authority because they've never dealt with said situation before. And in a certain scene, they didn't even treat the situation as seriously as I thought they would, despite despite the police task force having sent out what they claim to be thousands of their crew members on the lookout for Griffin, and for the police to tell Kemp that, oh, we only have like 5 people in the office right now, so I can't send anybody your way to help you in your situation. I mean, if you really were treating the situation as seriously as you were, you would actually send somebody Kemp's way, because he outrightly said that the Invisible Man was where he's at. I felt like the humor side of this film was not necessary, and it kind of held it back in terms of maybe how much more effective the film would have been if it was just strictly like a horror-like film, set in the 1930s. Because of this, we got scenes that I felt reminded me of like the Three Stooges. Although it was meant to be funny, I felt like it wasn't necessary. Because I would imagine that Griffin, being a madman now, that he was a dangerous guy, and if you were to trickle in some humor with that, I felt like it would take away from his character, which it often did when interacting with folk, throwing stuff at them, stealing their bike and whatnot. I felt like those things were not necessary. It was when he started going to the extreme level of setting a train down a path of destruction, throwing people off a cliff. I was thinking to myself, yeah, this Griffin guy, he can really do some damage, but because you're mixing in some humor with it, I don't know what to make of his character. Does he really want like global domination? For the power that he has, he could really, really hurt people, which he demonstrated, but at the same time, he's committing to these childish acts that sort of aligns with what Sal mentioned earlier, Jenny, who was played by Una O'Connor, which sort of ties into maybe my biggest complaint about this film. Again, technology was probably too limited, but when Jenny was screaming, I thought the audio was overblown. The audio quality was not good at all, and it physically disturbed me because the audio when she was screaming was not leveled. It could be due to technology, but then it was also a choice to have the character Jenny react to such an over-exaggerated moment, despite the situation of there being an Invisible Man being quite on a level of like extreme as well. I thought that maybe that's something they could have addressed, but I don't know. I'm not too sure about that. But I would say that's probably my biggest complaint about the film, though, because like I said, I was in a little physical distress whenever she was screaming like that. I kept on telling myself, you need to stop because my ears are starting to hurt. So I just wanted to point that out. Again, it might be a reflection of the technology at the time, but from a movie viewer perspective, I have to mention that because that plays into like the quality of the sound production. I would say the next thing that got me face palming is how the police task handled the situation. Like, it felt like they were very nonchalant about there being an Invisible Man. And I think what really did it for me was when they surrounded the house and started linking up through arms. I thought to myself, well, how is this going to stop the Invisible Man from escaping? I don't really understand. Could you have not come up with a better strategy? Which then brings me to like the ideas that the locals are coming up with and calling in to suggest, hey, if we do this to the Invisible Man, you guys can see him and blah, blah, blah. It's like, why didn't you guys take these ideas and put them into use instead of just looking the other way and saying, oh, the Invisible Man will never fall for that trick because he's too smart. Well, you don't know until you try. And obviously, what you guys have been trying based on your own ideas aren't working. So I wish maybe Kemp would have been the one to sort of like come up with ideas to escape his situation or lead Griffin to like him being captured somehow. Because let's not forget, Kemp was also a scientist, right? He should be smart enough to at least come up with some ideas about how to trap Griffin or escape his situation instead of him maybe overthinking it, which got him killed later down in the movie. That was unfortunate because I would have really liked Kemp. And I say this because Kemp, other than the Invisible Man himself, was my other favorite character in this film. Because for him to be in the situation that he was, I thought there was more potential for his character to sort of shine and just escape somehow or put in more effort to escape based on his level of intellect. So the last thing I want to point out is, despite the Invisible Man being a sort of concept that was interesting to take on, I felt that Griffin as a character was not really all that good at being a antagonist of the film. Yes, he ended up killing people, hurting people, moving at the speed of light somehow by being able to reach for these items and toss them at people. Seemed kind of not believable, but I would say the way that he got caught at the end, I thought that was a situation that he could have probably avoided by just using a little bit more brain. I would have even imagined that when the farmer was poking him with the stick, that he he should have felt that and woke up instantly, because he was able to catch Kemp back at the house when Kemp made that call to the police that one night. If he was able to sort of realize that Kemp was up to something and got up from his slumber, surely he would have recognized that somebody was poking him, and he should have like woken up and reacted to that. But no, that pretty much was what did him at the end. And it's a shame, like I said, because they made Griffin seem like a pretty smart guy coming up with this potion or formula to make a person invisible. But for him to go down that way, I feel like it was just a result of his opponents not being at a high enough intestinal level to sort of test him. So maybe he let his guard down. I think that's how I'm going to reason. He probably let his guard down because nobody was going to be able to get him. They weren't coming up with smart enough ideas. Whatever they threw at him, he could easily handle because they themselves had not ever dealt with something like him, and maybe were too in shock to even acknowledge the great ideas that were flowing into the police station. I think that's how I'm going to look at it. Maybe he just let his guard down, and that one time it led to his demise. Overall, though, for a film that came out in 1933 and the sort of technology that they were limited to and were still trying to incorporate and add onto as well into the movie industry, I think the film is pretty iconic, pretty influential, and set a stage for years to come. But maybe just take away a little humor next time. That's probably what I would recommend. So 8 out of 10. I think that's what I'm going to give the film. 8 out of 10.
I'm going to agree with Touly. My grade's going to be an 8 out of 10 as well. The movie for its time was amazing with the special effects and the technology that it used for its time and what it cost and how it impacted movies nowadays. It's amazing. There's some flaws to the movies, but I guess we can overlook them. 8 out of 10 for me. So I guess that does it for The Invisible Man from 1933. Please join us next time where we're going to review American Psycho.
Look at that subtle off-white coloring. The tasteful thickness of it. Oh my God. It even has a watermark.
Something wrong, Patrick? You're sweating.
Please like, comment, and subscribe. You can find our social media links below. And like always, keep watching movies.